So if you've been around kids, you've probably had a lot of questions asked you. Some of my favorite questions that kids have asked. Why did swear words get invented if you can't use them? That's a fabulous question. Right now, my favorite question from a kid is, why do crabs not have eyebrows? Have no answer for that one. How did people make the first tools if they didn't have any tools? How come spiders don't get stuck on their webs? You scientific folks might have an answer for that one. Why would anyone want a house phone? There aren't any games on them whatsoever. And they have lots more questions that are lovely to try to answer. But we've got questions too, us older people. And when we're in this kind of context, we remember that we've got some spiritual questions. We got some questions for God that we would like some answers to. But this summer, while Matt's going to be preaching on fun things like Manoah, I'm going to be dealing with the questions that God asks us. The questions that God asks us. And in the Bible, we're going to find several times where a question is asked, not God, why, but where Jesus asks us a question. And the first one you heard today in the text that was just read for you. John the Baptizer is with a couple of his followers. And as they're standing there, Jesus walks by, and John's gaze is right on Jesus, and he whispers to his friends, right there is the Lamb of God. And his two friends immediately start following behind Jesus. I don't know if Jesus thinks this is a little creepy or not, that they're following behind him, but in time he turns around and he asks them a question. What are you looking for? What do you want? And if you read the Gospel of John, it happens over and over and over again. There's a question, there's a phrase, there's an image, and it means one thing on the surface, and yet it means something a lot deeper. And here's one of those deep questions that Jesus asks us. So what are you looking for? What do you want? I think this is a profound question. It's a question that invites you and me to listen to our own desires. I find it profound that Jesus is interested in that. And by implication, Almighty and eternal God is interested in what we are looking for, in what we are longing for. God is interested in what we desire. And so we are being invited to listen to our desires. What is it that you want? What are you passionate about? What's the stuff that you see or you hear about, and all of a sudden there's a well of emotion and energy that rises up in you? What is it that you want? Don't you have some experiences in your life, and because you've had those experiences, you're really, really committed to something, right? You got that going on in there. What is it that you want? What is it that moves you? The things that upset you and worry you. God is interested in that stuff. And I think that God is interested in that stuff. God is interested in what you are drawn to Because when we pay attention to that, when we listen to that, we're hearing who we are called to be. I mean, how else would God call us than to put a desire on our heart that we need to pay attention to? And so Jesus asks us, what do you want? What is it? And he invites us to listen. Listen to ourselves. Because through our desires, God is going to impact and even change the world. What do you want? What do you want? What are you looking for? All right, let's step back just a little bit here. Maybe you know this. I know this about myself. I need to pay attention to my desires, but I need to look at them deeply because my desires can be twisted. We have some desires that are just selfish. I do. Some desires, we're wanting some instant gratification. Some desires are just superficial. Some desires are even destructive. And yeah, some desires can even be evil. So how do we listen to our desires and sort them out? Sort out the ones that are not worthy of who we are called to be, and identify those that have their origin in God. Well, here's one way that might be helpful to you. Imagine that you're going to write your own eulogy. And you want folks to say some things about you that are true, that are about your life. I once had to preach somebody's funeral sermon, and I couldn't find a thing to say about them that was good, other than that they were a child of God. It was awful. Where I was living, a member of my church brought their cousin from California and said, hey, his mother passed away. He needs somebody to do the funeral. Would you do that? I said, sure, I'll do that. So I meet with the guy. His mother hadn't lived in the community for 60 years. She had moved to California. Nobody had seen her in that time. She had never been back, but she wanted to be buried in West Virginia, like most of us do. And so the guy, I said, okay, I need you to help me say some things about your mom's life. He says, first of all, I don't want you saying any of this religious mumbo-jumbo, none of this Jesus stuff. And I said, sir, you're going to have to get somebody else. That's what I do. And he said, oh, okay, all right, wait just a minute. And then I said, okay, tell me some stuff about your mom. And he spends an hour telling me that his mom had red hair and she was the worst human being to ever walk the face of the planet. It was awful. How do you stand up and say something about somebody's life when there's nothing to say? Let me contrast that with what I did this week. We had a beloved member here pass away, Roby Young. And I did his service Thursday. And I was able to quote Jesus over Roby's life, where Jesus says, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. And one after one, I was able to lift up qualities in Roby's life. Lift up things that he has been involved in, ways that he's impacted people's lives. and it was beautiful. Do you know that one of the last things that he did it from the hospital, is he got his daughter to go and buy over 70 roses for his wife. And so I was with his wife, Carol, and we were preparing for the service, and I was sneezing a little bit, roses all around me. I don't know if he wanted me to mention it in his funeral sermon or not, but I did. One of the things that Roby wanted to be known for and remembered for was that he loved and appreciated his wife deeply, and he lived his life in that manner. That was his desire, his heart's desire, to be grateful for his wife. Isn't that glorious? Guys, you're probably thinking, good idea. Let me put that as a reminder. It might be that something that could help us to identify what our God-given desires are is just to listen to those desires and say, what do I want to be remembered for? How do I want my friends and my family, maybe even my pastor, to talk about me after I'm gone? But I need to take you a step deeper than that. That's a helpful. But let me take you a step deeper. I want to give you something that Christians have been using for hundreds and hundreds of years to help us to sort out the selfish stuff, maybe even the stuff that we should not be spending time worrying about, and to help us find the stuff, the God-given desires that are on our heart, okay? And it's a question that's been used by Christians for hundreds of years. The question is this: is your desire in the light of eternity going to make a difference? All right, I want to make sure you're with me here. So I'm going to ask you to repeat that, okay? I'm going to say it, you say it. Is my desire in the light of eternity going to make any difference? That one's just a step deeper than the eulogy one. You notice the eulogy is, what will my friends and family say about me after I'm gone? This one is, in light of who God is eternally, is what I'm upset about, is what I'm committed to, is what I'm passionate about, going to make a difference, going to matter? In the light of eternity, is this desire, if I have it fulfilled, is it going to matter? If you were here last week, we had sort of a guest pastor, Pastor Carrie. She worships among us, but she's moved here from Ohio. Her husband's an oncologist. And she preached on a text from the prophet Micah. That's one of those mountain-high texts that most of the Old Testament floats through, okay? It comes from Micah, and it's this: what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Can you hear the eternal desires of God beating in that verse? What does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. And so I pause and say, are the things that I'm desiring, are the things that I'm upset about, are the things that I'm passionate about, the things that I want, that I'm looking for, do they resonate with those eternal things? If we wanted to go to the New Testament, somebody comes to Jesus and says, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, there's only one. It's got two parts. It's to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so I step back and pause and say, Mike, does this desire resonate with the love of God, heart, soul, mind, and strength, and the love of neighbor? Or is it just a superficial thing? Is it just a selfish thing? Is it just maybe even an evil thing? What are we looking for? What are you looking for? I was sitting with a friend this past week while I was at annual conference, the yearly gathering of the United Methodist Churches in West Virginia annual conference. And I was sitting with my buddy Paul Rebello. Hey, Paul, you might be watching on the YouTubes. He does that sometimes. And Paul and I were just talking about stuff, and Paul says this to me. He says, you know, someday, if God says to me, Paul, you were a little bit too kind to those people. You were a little bit easy on those people. He said, if God says that to me, I'm good with that. Can you hear what Paul wants his eulogy to be? He wants some of us to stand up and say, Paul was the kindest guy you'd ever meet, compassionate. He was the guy who really cared, maybe cared a little bit too much. Would you agree that that desire resonates with do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God, love neighbor? What is it that you want? What are you looking for? I love the writer Thomas Merton. He wrote a book called No Man is an Island, and he said this: why do we spend our lives striving to be something that we would never want to be? If only we knew what we wanted. Why do we waste our time doing things which, if we only stop to think about them, are just the opposite of what we were made for? A little while ago, I was sitting up there, and before the music started, and I was just thinking, why do you want to preach this sermon, Mike? What's the desire behind it? And I believe that the reason why I wanted to preach this sermon is so that you could listen to the desires that God is placing in your heart. Because as Jesus says, you're the light of the world, and you're the salt of the earth. And if we could just figure out what we want, wow, what a blessing we would all be. If only we knew what we wanted.